morning and welcome to my YouTube channel, The Fruitcake Astrologer, where I will give you an experienced astrologer's view on current events and people in the news. And today I'm going to talk about Jeffrey Epstein. Unfortunately, we do not have a good time of birth on the guy, so I had to research his life. I went to Wikipedia and I looked it up. But here's the scans. I use these scans to verify the time of birth. You'll see here on the 6th, major aspect, and of course the 12th house is jail. And then on the 23rd, there's all this stuff. He was, either assaulted or, staged something to try to get himself, out of the general population. Who knows? Anyway, and on August 10th, he was found in that morning, quote unquote, hung in his cell. At the time, and you'll see here, this aspect on the 10th, that is a quintessential murder aspect in astrology. Okay, so I use those scans to kind of verify my time of birth. And using this chart, I hope my time of birth is good. It seems to fit. I'm going to do an interpretation of Jeffrey Epstein and who he was and what made him tick. So here you're going to see, I brought his natal chart back, and you'll see that he is Scorpio rising in the low degrees of Scorpio. He's a Capricorn sun and an Aries moon, and you will notice that his moon doesn't make any Ptolemaic aspects. And I'm going to try to keep astro speak to a minimum, but what that basically means is that the moon is allowed to kind of run wild. So in astrology, there are 3 bad planets called the malefics: Mars, Saturn, and Pluto. And by golly, if all 3 of those aren't ruling his big 3, which is said to create the temperament of a person. Now, there are other people who have this combination. So whether I would see the negative or positive side of the quote-unquote, difficult planets would be depending on the aspects and houses and, etc. Okay? So right now, we're getting a hint that he's not a very nice guy. Okay, so we know he's bright. And if you look, he has an out-of-bounds Mercury, which makes him bright in the 3rd house, its own house. And Neptune is squaring it conjunct Spica, which is associated with greatness. Okay, so it literally says, I am a cunning liar. And I do this because I want power and I want to hobnob with wealthy, powerful people. Okay, that's a T-squared to Pluto. So already I'm getting the picture of a sociopath. And you're like, why would you say this? Well, one, he's smart. Let's just compare him to Ted Bundy. Ted Bundy was smart. Ted Bundy had the ability to lie. Brilliant liar. And that's what this chart says, a brilliant liar. He had that as well. And I'm also with that difficult moon in the 6th in Aries. The 6th house are pets. That would tend to indicate he may have taken his anger out on pets. And we know sociopaths tend to abuse animals in their youth. So I am, I'm getting the symbology of someone who was probably a sociopath. Now, whether he's a psychopath, I can't tell you that. That's a shrink. But from what I know, it's sure looking like one. So really difficult mother. That very strong Mars literally says anger. Mars is anger at women. So it says, I am really, really angry at women. And if I were to ask Jeffrey Epstein, do you like women? He'd go, yeah, baby, I love women. But that would be a lie. He does not like women. And I think maybe some of this stuff is getting back at people in his life. Now, so he had a very angry mother. It looks like an erratic childhood. Uranus ruling the 4th house. It really, I think his problems came down to his father, who looked to be a weak man. What I would classify as a never-do-well. It's in the 12th house of self-undoing, conjunct Neptune. I'm escapist. My dad was an escapist, maybe a liar. And that tells me that that's who he learned to lie from. And maybe they had this, hell on wheels mother that, dad lied. And so he learned to be an accomplished liar, to evade the angry mother figure. Now, you'll also notice that Neptune rules his 5th house, Venus and Mars. That's sex. I mean, this guy was definitely oversexed. And that Neptune ruling it, and that Neptune squaring Pluto up there, Dad was probably heavy duty into pornography, and that his taste in, very young females probably came from the dad. Now, as a human being, and looking at his life story, never married, never had kids, and so to me that is confirmation of a difficult childhood, because you'll know people who grow up and never marry and never have children tend to have had an extremely painful childhood. At least he's never married, never had kids that we know of so far. He dropped out of college suddenly. I'm left wondering if it was over a pregnancy scare with someone he met in college, and decided, this isn't the path for me. It looks related to some sexual event. Was he forced to quit? I don't know. Maybe more of this stuff will come out later. It could be his family just needed money. Sexually, this would say a man who is confused. Okay, Neptune confuses. And so in his mind, he can probably justify this. Now, I watched the news too. They talked about how when the braces came off, he was no longer interested in the young girls. And I don't think that's it. I think it had to do with their innocence. It looks to me like what he found attractive was their innocence. And once they lost that, once they were jaded, they were no longer attractive to him, which is pretty dastardly. I also think he went after rich and powerful people. I suspect because his father vilified the wealthy, saying, oh, they've got it all. We never had a chance. They keep the little people down. They're bad. They're, responsible for all the pain, the little people have, which is, of course, as ridiculous as saying that, all females are bad, all males are bad, all Democrats are bad, all Republicans are bad. That is not true. There are good rich people and bad rich people, and good women and bad women, and to vilify an entire segment of the population based on their bank account, I think is not true. But I think Jeffrey Epstein, one of the reasons he went after the rich and powerful was to prove that he was smarter than them, to trick them, that I want to be, but at the same time, I think he envied them and he wanted to be one of them. So you'll notice the low degrees of Scorpio. If you put the scorpion in the sign of Scorpio, the pinchers start at the low degrees. So that is his rising sign, and I think that says everything. He was pinching them, literally pinching people to make his money. To make a long story short, assuming I got the time of birth correct, this would be the chart of a sociopath, maybe a psychopath. We have all the indicators here. We have the pornography link with Bundy, remember? We have the overbearing mother, difficult mother that he did not like. We have the ability to lie with great ease. It literally says brilliant liar. And we also have abuse of, if this chart is correct, it looked like he probably hurt animals as a child. And the final thing is he's very smart. So, yeah. According to astrology, he was absolutely murdered. There's people out there, I hear people who say, oh, he's really alive. He got whisked off and he's in witness protection. And I don't think so. I think he received a death threat. A credible death threat, which is why he appealed his bail hearing. And before he could even get the answer from his bail appeal hearing, he had quote unquote committed suicide. Now that makes no sense either. I mean, let's just be logical human beings. A couple things I want to say about, him being a sociopath is one, that I think he cared deeply about his brother, and his brother looks to have been like his father and never do well, that he was always taking care of and bailing out the responsible, one, taking care of the less than competent brother. And I also think he and Ghislaine, I'm almost thinking they were married somehow, maybe not legally, but she looked to be a real rock to him. And I think One of the best things that ever happened to him. Now, people have said he was an Israeli spy, he was in counterintelligence, and I'm not really seeing that anywhere. So, not getting a read on that. And one thing else I want to point out about his 8th house is ruled by Pleiades, which is the weeping sisters. And the 8th house is, of course, how we die. I think he died crying. That's what this chart says. He will die crying. So I think, he was absolutely murdered and he died crying. And that's just a horrible thing to even think about. I'm sure there are people out there who would go, well, he deserves it. But, anyway, not so good. So anyway, if you're not an astrologer, you can drop off now because I'm going to take a look at his death chart. Now, of course, predicting death in most states is illegal, but looking at it after the fact, there's nothing wrong with that. So if you're an astrologer and you want to see what someone in dire danger looks like, go ahead and stay on. So it is very obvious to me after looking at his transits that this guy did not employ an astrologer, or he would have been much more careful. Okay, so this is Jeffrey. This is a quadra wheel. The inner is natal, second progression, third solar arc, the outside transits. Okay, now if you're into astrology, stop the chart and see how many you get. Now, of course, we're supposed to see it 3 ways, right? I got 4. There may be more. I stopped looking maybe. But anyway, first I see transiting Pluto in conjuncting his natal Pluto, which is not in of itself enough to do anything because Pluto moves so slowly. There are a lot of people with this aspect, and they're not all going to get killed, right? But it's something. Pluto conjunct Mercury in the 3rd house. I believe this was a death threat. I think he realized that he was there was a hit on him, or he learned that they were out to get him. Now, if I were looking at a suicide chart, I would see a lot of aspects between Saturn and the moon. I'm depressed, that would say depression. But what I see with Saturn is, yes, I'm afraid, but I am shocked. And if you look at his history, he's managed to stay one step ahead of everybody for years and years. And how much dirt do you think that guy had on rich and powerful people? And I think he really thought he was going to skate. And the fact that these people were like, we're just going to silence you once and for all was very shocking to him. I think to the end he thought he could buy his way out either with, blackmail, squeezing people in power, the stuff he had on people, or his enormous wealth. And I think he was just really shocked. Next, we see solar arc Pluto conjunct the ascendant. Now, that's much more personal. Of course, the ascendant is the most personal point in the chart. So now we're getting 2, maybe 3 if you count the Pluto conjunct Mercury. We also see that this is the big one, and I think this one could almost stand alone. I don't even think it needs the 3 because it's a solar arc, which is event-driven and very, very powerful in prediction. So we see that solar arc Mars is squaring his natal Pluto. So we're seeing his natal Pluto under tremendous stress, okay, which is the natural ruler of death. So that's it. If you would like to hear more astrological insights and views on current events and people in the news, please be sure to like, share, and subscribe. I'd appreciate it. And thank you so much for listening.